We want today to be as valuable as possible, so we hope you find this to be educational and walk away with some tactical next steps for preparing your campaigns next year. So with no further ado, I will hand it over to Chris. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. Thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here and chat with all you today. And a little bit of background on myself. I started Versium about, almost 10 years ago now. And Kevin Marcus, our CTO, and I worked together quite a long time in the identity and data space, dating back to InfoSpace when we really pioneered bringing the white and yellow pages online. So a lot of experience dealing with data, identity data, and how you find and understand and reach people. And our vision with this company was really to help marketers become more data-driven on their journey of doing the marketing that they do for all their customers. And for us, that means how do we go in and help fix their existing first-party data? How do we enrich it, which is the topic we'll be talking a lot about today, to make that first-party data more powerful? And then ultimately, how does that all lead into activation and all the different things you could do? So pleasure to be joined with Matt today with Leverage Labs. We've been working together for quite a few years now. We kind of focus on the data and the technology, and they focus on the most important thing, the customer who ultimately is looking to get all the value. So with that said, Matt, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name's Matt. I'm one of the co-founders and COO of Leverage Lab. We've been around since 2017. I have spent my entire 20-year career in marketing and data. And specifically, Leverage Lab, we're a first-party data agency and consultancy, and we empower organizations to unlock the value of their data to achieve personalization at scale and drive profitable customer relationships. We have services that encompass three major areas to help clients achieve personalization at scale, and that includes data decisioning and delivery. So we do everything from the customer data infrastructure to the decisioning around customer journey management, data science, machine learning, product recommendations, and then we actually handle campaign management on paid media channels and owned and operated channels. So we have several clients that use Versium, and we're going to talk a little bit about the specific ways that we use Versium to get better performance for our clients.
Thanks, Matt. Well, jumping right in, just in terms of a quick agenda, I mean, today we're going to be talking about data enrichment strategies as you go into 2023. And we're going to talk a bit about the importance of identity data, how that plays a role in terms of the mapping and association of data to first-party data. And then first, before you get into this enrichment, you've got to take a look at what data you have that you're enriching. And a lot of data is bad. It's dirty. It's got errors. We're going to talk a bit about that and how you can address and fix some of those issues to get the most value from the different enrichment you can do. And then we'll get into the different enrichment that we're doing together and the value of that. Just as a little bit of background, we all work here in the marketing world. Digital marketing and omni-channel for that case is growing rapidly, and it's really driven heavily by data. You can see that the number of data sources customers use is growing, and being data driven, which has been a focus over the past decade, is really yielding great results for the marketer. And I think at this point, 78 to 80% of marketers feel that they are highly data driven in their marketing journey. And then there's some dynamics that are occurring here in the market right now that is really putting emphasis for brands and marketers to focus on the existing data they have. And there's really been a shift away from these black box ad tech platforms where there's lack of transparency in terms of who's being targeted and confidence that the ad and media spend is happening in the most effective way. And then you combine that with Google's potential removal of the third-party cookie, which keeps getting delayed, growing privacy issues. And what we're seeing is that there is just that much more emphasis being put on identity technologies that are used in conjunction with your first-party data so that you can control all of your omni-channel spend, whether it's direct marketing, digital, and the rest. And that requires a lot of different capabilities to cleanse that data, to enrich that data, and ultimately make it more valuable for your marketing. And I think at this point, Matt, I'm kind of curious, to hear from your perspective, the customer's voice, Are you seeing that there is that much more emphasis? Are you seeing companies that are really realizing that they've got this treasure trove of data, but they've got to do different things to maximize its value?
Yeah, absolutely. So Leverage Lab has been in this game since 2017, and we work a lot with customer data platforms, which are a technology that allow you to really collect and leverage your first-party data. And we use tools like Versium to help enhance that first-party data that we have on clients have on their users. And like you said, with the deprecation of third-party cookies imminent, a lot of companies had DMPs that were heavily reliant on third-party cookies technology for targeting. And when all of that eventually goes away, brands will have no choice but to rely on first-party data. So those companies that have invested in that, in a first-party data strategy, are going to be ahead of the game.
So just we think about the digital advertising world, it really evolved over the past decade or two, where identity data was the key for the underlying targeting. And as more and more people registered and logged into websites, the ability to take the anonymous cookie that tracked the browser activity, associate it to an identity, which is a person. And how do you identify a person? It's an email address, it's a physical address and name, it's a phone number. These are unique identifiers that allow you to identify an individual, whether that is a business person or a consumer. And that same identity data can then be used to associate other characteristics about that person, like demographics and firmographics and purchase interest. And so now we can start weaving in those characteristics and insights within the digital ad targeting. But sitting underneath all of it is this concept of identity resolution, identity graphing, and it really has been one of the key cores to the growth in the advertising industry because of the targeting that allows. Unfortunately, over the years, it also problems arose, right? There's been a lot of fake traffic on the internet, bot traffic, robot computers that look like identities, that have false emails, that are driving impressions, amongst many other things in terms of just, do you have confidence that the data that's underlying is deterministic versus probabilistic? Are you actually reaching the right people? Procter & Gamble in 2017, cut $200 million in media spend because they felt a high percentage of this spend was just being wasted. It was not going to the right people, or in fact, it was going to fake identities. It was not, that media spend was not effective advertising. And that all arose from sort of some of the nuances in the industry, which again puts emphasis back into first party data, because now if you've got really good data, you know exactly who you're targeting. Anything to comment on this one, Matt, just before we go on to some of the problems we see in terms of bad data?
Not much beyond what you said. I think anybody that's been in marketing knows that there's some bad players out there doing bad things, and the more that you can build your first party data set on real humans and real targeting and things like the identity graph that you're talking about here, you'll have better results and less waste of ad spend.
Yeah. Well, we deal with data all the time, and we've seen just about every type of scenario. And if you look at what even Salesforce will say, that 40 to 50, maybe even higher percent of CRM data, your customer data, is bad, it's outdated, it's not usable, there's errors, there's data entry errors. And before you can do any sort of data enrichment, the first step in the whole process is making sure the integrity of your first party data is as pristine as possible. Garbage in yields garbage out in terms of the enrichment process and all the value we're going to get into that you get from that. So the first step in your strategy about data enrichment is really making sure that the data you're enriching, that you're starting with, is good data. And marketers are not tremendously satisfied with their data. There are a number of different problems that make it less valuable, less usable for all the different things that data is used for in the journey of being data driven. Whether it's quality or hygiene, data errors, data entry errors, is it complete? You're missing fields. You might have an email in some case, but no address or phone number. You might have demographics in only a small percent of your data. So completeness is a big issue. Accessibility, is it available throughout the organization? That's where the CDP and centralizing the data is starting to add value to taking data silos and making it more available and accessible through the organization. Privacy is becoming a big issue. Do you have consent? And if you're not centralizing your data and getting that consent, then you're going to have problems. And of course, other things that come into play. Timeliness, identity reconciliation. You might have different names in different databases, but all sorts of problems that are seen within the existing data within the company. And in fact, only 33% of marketers feel they're fully satisfied with their data relative to its use within the organization. And so it's a big problem that needs to be solved as a first step. And I'm assuming, Matt, when all your customer dealings, as you're looking to activate digital audiences and do different things, that you've probably seen some bad data also in the journey with your customers.
Yeah, I think anybody that's spent any time doing marketing and using data knows there's a plethora of information out there on how quickly data gets out of date, and the need to constantly keep up with that. In the B2B world, with people switching jobs every 2 to 4 years, you can't rely on just collecting it once and just leaving it alone. You have to make sure that your data is constantly kept up to date with changes.
So we call that data preparation in terms of the first most critical step before you do data enrichment, and whether that's contact data or identity data for more better reach, or whether it's insights data for better customer understanding. The first step is cleanse your data and prepare it for the data enrichment process. And there's a lot of things that can be done. And when we think about data preparation and cleanse, if you can fix 20-30% of your data before it goes into the enrichment process, there's going to be that much more value that comes from these different things you can do when it comes to data enrichment. And there are new tools evolving and new companies even that are launching that are bringing sort of these ETL data processes and data fixing, if you will. And here's a slew of the different things that we see in the market and that can be done to data. And before we do data enrichment, we run the data oftentimes through an automated process that does a lot of this. And again, we're going to be launching some tools that just do it in and of itself. Contact data validation, right? If you've got your CRM data and you've got old email addresses, we talked to one big retailer. They say, we got 70 million members across 50 million households. We've only got 18 million emails, and we've been gathering them for 20 years. So a lot of that data is going to be bad. It's going to be missing. If they've been manually entered, you get things like they don't hit shift 2, so you get data errors. Lots of lack of standardization. There are different ways to say New York. Some people call it the Big Apple in the social world. New York spelled New York, NY. Sweet as a sweet can be spelled differently. And if you're doing field mapping and you have different strings of characters, you can run into some problems. So standardizing all these different things is important. And then you get into sort of the field structure. We've seen where you've got address, all fields, all the components of an address in one field versus city, state, and zip in separate fields, and have it different in different records. Shifted fields where it's supposed to have an email, but you've got a name or you've got a phone number. And then you get duplicate records. There's just all kinds of potential bad things that can arise and can be seen in data that leads to this CRM data being bad. So the first step really is fixing it. And I'm curious, Matt, when you talk with your customers, how many people do you feel really understand what's in their data? I mean, we have had people say, hey, our data is great. And then we get it, we look at it, we're like, yeah, did you know that it's not as great as you thought? I mean, I feel like a lot of marketers and people, they don't have you can't see every record with your eyes. And so a lot of people don't even realize what they have, What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it usually comes to light when they start executing on use cases with their data. So we start with a firm data foundation with enterprise customer data infrastructure, and how clean and standardized and complete your data impacts all the downstream things that you do with that. So you're really laying the foundation. So things like machine learning or segmentation, it's really hard to create a segment of users when you've got New York in your example spelled 20 different ways, right? So it's really just laying the foundation to make all the downstream processes and use cases that you're trying to execute on that much more effective.
Well, there's ways that certainly with some of the technology we're developing where we can do deep field inspection and help the end customer understand, hey, do you know that X% of your emails are badly formatted? Y% of your phone numbers are not normalized. And so first step in any process of data cleansing prior to enrichment is just first understand, is this data good? You may not want to incorporate it into your CDP if it's got a high error rate, if you will. So there are tools now being developed that will do a deep inspection of the data and tell you, how good it is, and what is wrong with it. And ultimately, the first step in fixing any bad data is first understanding what needs to be fixed. And there's some really, really cool tools out there that will do this. And then what do you end up with? As clean of data as possible, which means you're putting less not usable data into your marketing automation platform, into your CDP, which lowers your cost in some cases, but most importantly, ensures that when you pull data from these different tools for your direct marketing, your email, your digital, that you get the highest activity and activation rate. And so now you've cleaned your data. Now let's get into the fun stuff. It's time to enrich it. And from our perspective, there are a number of different things when it comes to data enrichment, all powered by this concept of identity, meaning we've identified a person. We are confident we know who this person is. And we've got a bunch of other data about this person, about this household, about the business they work with, that we can then associate or append or enrich to this cleansed first-party data. Some of the things that the use cases here are, to help improve your understanding of your customers. If you know who your best customers are that are spending the most, understanding their characteristics. What is their demographic profile? In the B2B world, what is the firmographic profile? What type of business is it that is, engaging with your solution? Is it tend to be smaller companies or bigger companies, both by revenue and by things like employee count? Once you have this understanding from this data enrichment, you can start segmenting your existing customer or your prospect list of your potential customers you want to market to, so that you can do different creatives for people and companies or targets that have similar characteristics. You might want to market to the higher end companies, or by higher end meaning larger companies, with a different message than smaller companies. You might want to market and message differently to consumers that are over 40 versus under 40. And things of this character, things of this nature, which makes that marketing more effective. The more contact or identity data that you can incorporate, the average person has 3 or 4 emails. This is what unlocks your ability to reach them through omni-channel, whether it's email, direct mail, or digital. The more identity data you have, the more often you're going to be able to put ads in front of the specific people you want. And because it's your first party data that's being enriched, you know exactly who you're marketing to. You can reinforce just to those people across multiple platforms versus going into this black box and saying, I want to market to high net worth people, at big companies in Facebook. Okay, well, now when you go to Google and use their filtering, how do you know if you're reinforcing to the same people? But if you're using your own first party data, you can continually reinforce. And that also allows you to start doing some very powerful things for attribution tracking. Because when you know exactly who you're marketing to, if they show up in your environment, you can start putting those things together. And so these are all some of the great value you get from identity powered data enrichment. And I'm assuming, Matt, when your customers engage with you and the different things, whether it's CDP facilitation, data enrichment, they're seeing certainly strong ROI from these types of activities.
Yeah, everything you're talking about, we refer to as personalization at scale. And it's something that we focus heavily on with our clients. And, most companies are at minimum collecting an email address in exchange for something like a discount or a newsletter sign up or what have you. So you have limited information, only an email there, obviously. So the more that you can enhance that customer record with information like demographics, firmographics, interest data, things like that, the more you can personalize your communications with the client or with your customer, and the better your results will be.
And there's this whole slew of different, we think of two really fundamental types of enrichment. Identity, which is contact points, which helps you reach your both customers and your potential customers more effectively. But then insights, which is the characteristics. And insights, as I mentioned, demographics, financial, activity and purchase interest, and in the B2B world, firmographics, job title, job function. These are all the type of attributes that can be associated or appended to an input record. And again, notice it's an input record, the data enrichment, and then the things you can get. So a little redundant here in terms of just the types of things you can do, demographic, firmographic. You can also start cross-integrating consumer persona and business. And that's going to be really powerful here in a moment when we start talking to the B2B marketers that want to really tap into digital. But being able to say, okay, who is a person, as a consumer and as a business decision maker? Maybe they are a VP of marketing from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, and then a soccer mom or soccer dad, from 5 till 9 a.m., right? They have a consumer persona and business, and these things are all overlapping, especially in the work from home environment. So moving from sort of data enrichment to the identity or contact data. I'm curious, Matt, like you mentioned that your customers might have one email, they might have, missing fields. Are you seeing that, email is sort of the key, one of the keys? I mean, we're starting to see that email is sort of unlocking everything. It's a unique identifier. Are you seeing similar things? I mean, it seems to me that people need to start focusing on getting more of this data that helps identify their customers most effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, focusing your efforts on at minimum, capturing the email address when users are on your website. We call that unknown to known, making those anonymous users known, but then, enriching that information is super important. It's important for everything from personalizing the customer journey to, if you're doing any type of machine learning or AI, the more data that you have on those contacts, the better that machine learning will be. Product recommendations, if you're making recommendations for products, it's much more informed if you have additional information on what those users are interested in. Reporting and analytics, the more information you have on users, the better your reporting and insights will become. So capturing the email is just the first step. When you're working with an identity graph like this, obviously there's additional points of identity that are appended to the user that become really important in addressability. And what we mean by addressability is the ability to reach that person. So if you just have one email, great. If they have multiple emails or phone numbers or address, even better, because when you're talking about targeting those users in Facebook, Google, wherever, they allow for multiple identifiers to target those users. So the more you have, the likelihood your match rate will go up and your addressability will be much stronger.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I have a CD Maddie at Yahoo. I've had that email for like 20 years. I have not logged in to receive an email there in probably 8 years, if not longer. Yet, I use that email to log into different environments quite regularly. So if somebody has that email and they want to email market to me, I'm not going to receive the message. And so when you think about additional emails to the same person, it's very powerful. When you think of marketing to a household, it might be that somebody registered, but the shopper is a different person in the household. And so marketing to the entire household can be powerful. And as you say, digital, all of these ad tech environments will allow upload of this data so that ads can be placed just in front of these people. And when you think of the B2B marketer, those consumer emails that can be associated to a business contact really, really expand the ability to reach that target audience within these channels. And we're going to get into that in a lot more detail in a couple slides. It's really a game changer for the B2B marketer. The types of things, inputs and outputs here with contact data. I mean, we talked a lot about email address and phone, but you can also do things like IP to business domain, where you can take the IP address of your traffic, and for quite a healthy percentage, 40, 50%, you can identify what business not necessarily the person unless they've registered, but what businesses have been visiting your site. And what does that allow you to do is now create an ABM campaign, meaning now let's identify people in different job functions and titles that you want to market to build brand awareness, because you know that there's some interest, they visited your site. And ABM allows you to start targeting really the entire buying committee. And then the whole online audience is, how do you get as much contact data as possible to extend the reach? Matt, you mentioned these ad tech platforms, Facebook, Google. I mean, 70% of the digital ad spend goes through these big walled gardens. But all of them, and we find oftentimes, certainly in the B2B world, that not as many people are that sophisticated as in the consumer world when it comes to digital. And they don't always know that you can actually upload contact data, and you can do it in an encrypted or hashed way. So you're not passing any PII. Facebook accepts 3 emails, physical address, and phone number, meaning if you've got a list of 100,000 or 1 million people you want to market to, you can upload the emails, addresses, and phone for those people, and ads will only appear exactly in that audience. Google accepts 8 emails, physical address, and phone. LinkedIn, unlimited emails. Broader programmatic for onboarding to the other ad tech environments via what's currently cookie boarding and the rest. Also takes this data. And so the more contact data you have, it really enables the maximum reach in your digital spend, and it also improves engagement because you're putting ads where these people are actively surfing and the rest. And do you find that certainly in the B2B world that this is a growing awareness? I mean, we've ran into people that say, oh yeah, I use Facebook, but I use their lookalike. And in the B2B world, how do you know who you're targeting versus if you can upload a list of folks that you specifically want to reach? And what do you see with your customers in terms of the growing awareness or expertise in this, in the B2B world particularly?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to address there. One, I think most people are familiar with like pixel-based targeting with these platforms, where you're simply retargeting people that have come to your website. But what we're talking about here is the custom audiences, or the CRM upload. So you're taking your actual customer list and you're uploading it into these platforms. And most of the time, you have an email address at minimum, right? Rarely do you have more than one if you're collecting that on your own. So if you're uploading CRM lists into these platforms, typically it's a 30% match rate, give or take. And what Versium does is it appends these additional identifiers, either additional emails, phones, or address information, and allows you to upload that into these platforms and get better match rates. So because you have more identifiers, the match rate goes up. And we've seen it over and over again be 80% plus match rate, which is really huge if you think about the campaign performance, right? And especially if you're working with some smaller lists, a lot of times you have to have at least 1,000 people in an audience to target them. So if your list is too small and your match rate is too low, you won't be able to execute that campaign. So it makes smaller lists viable, and it obviously increases the match rate, so you're reaching more people. So the campaign performance is absolutely going to be better. And one of the key things that attracted us to Versium was that crosswalk between the consumer identity and the professional identity, right? So a lot of times on a B2B situation, users might give their personal email and you want to speak to them against their professional identity, and maybe vice versa. But what it really attracted us to Versium was being able to have that crosswalk between the consumer and the B2B identity. So, a lot of these platforms, obviously Facebook and Google especially, they work off of the consumer identity. So if you have a bunch of business emails, you need something like Versium to be able to append those additional consumer identifiers in order to get match rates in those platforms, right? Because they don't always have, 9 times out of 10, they don't have the business identity for those users. So that's where the kind of rubber meets the road with using Versium, is that they're able to append those additional identifiers. And you mentioned lookalikes. Those platforms are also doing lookalikes based on the consumer identity for those users. It will have some behavioral stuff related to what they're doing professionally if they're doing it on the same device, but more often than not, the lookalikes are done via the consumer identity. So It's better to go into something like Versium and create your ideal customer profile of all of the people, if you're a B2B marketer, that are in your B2B universe that you want to target, right? And that way you're not accidentally getting people in a Facebook lookalike audience that aren't necessarily part of your target because they're doing a lookalike on the consumer identity versus the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. We think of that as sort of the B to B to C graph, and it's really powerful for business people. And again, you may want to do your ICP identification through Firmographic Append first. But what we find also is even consumer marketers, right? We find people that want to market to certain business profiles. We had a motorcycle company approach us because they wanted to target VPs and higher in tech companies. So we were able to pull the SEC codes for the SIC codes for the tech companies, create a B2B audience, and an overlay with consumers. So it's actually a consumer marketing use case, but where the targeting is business people. So there's a lot of overlap there. And I thought the B2B marketer's dilemma is, in fact, that the entire ad tech ecosystem was designed to market to consumers. And just to highlight some key points underlying what you're saying, you think of LinkedIn as a B2B social media networking site. But it's interesting in that 75% of LinkedIn profiles are actually mapped to their person's personal email, i.e. cdmatty@yahoo, not cmatty@Versium. So when you upload the list into LinkedIn via these mechanisms we just talked about, if you're only uploading business emails, your chance of LinkedIn finding those profiles so the ads appear just on those people is very low. And when you look at Facebook, obviously very much a consumer site, if you upload a list of business emails, I've got it, let's say I got a director and hire, list of directors and hire in marketing job functions across SaaS companies. And I've got, 200,000 or 300,000 people I want to market to within Facebook, which is one of the most dominant ad platforms. You only will be able to put ads in front of 11%. And the same thing happens with cookies, because it's the underlying identity data that enables the targeting is primarily consumer. So the good news, as you said, is the B2B graph, which we've been talking about. Typically what we're able to see is you can add about 5 to 6 additional contact points per business record. Now, I know we're focusing in business marketing right now, but again, it overlays with consumer, as I mentioned. So those 5 to 6 additional contact points is what's unlocking the ability to put ads in front of the specific people you want to market to, and driving the increase in match rates that you're talking about. And don't forget, you can also do the firmographic and demographic characteristics first. So before you upload into Facebook and Google to do effective digital, you might want to pull down their consumer profile, meaning who are they as a human, as a person? Do they have kids in the household? You're doing B2B marketing, but you might want to have a creative that is attractive to somebody with different consumer characteristics as a person, right? Do they have kids? What's their age? Things of this nature can help you tune your B2B marketing. And then, of course, you might want to segment by the firmographic characteristics also. So here we're talking about contact enrichment that allows you to increase your reach, but don't forget, you also want to do the insights enrichment, because all of this is what's going to drive more effective marketing ROI. And to what you were just saying, Matt, and this is a bit of an outdated slide, we need to update it. I mean, we're regularly seeing, after we take a base level business list, north of 90+%, sometimes even 100%, meaning you can actually, instead of only putting ads in front of 11% of the people you want to target, you're reaching 80-90%. And the true power of your first party data is realized within the digital activation. And this is just match rate. This isn't necessarily did the ad appear. This really is just, is there a potential for an ad to appear within these different environments, because these different environments and platforms see those contact data, meaning, okay, on Facebook, I see these emails now, so I know at some point I'll be able to put an ad, but you also got to think of what environments they're in, and are they generating impressions, which we're going to get to in a moment. But anything to comment on this, Matt? I know we do a lot of work with you guys, and you guys are regularly commenting on how these, I mean, you kind of covered it already, so maybe there's we've covered your perspective on this one, but anything else to add before we go to the next slide?
Not much other than, we run most of our campaigns through Versium if it involves first party data, because we know we're going to get a better match rate and better performance out of the campaign for our clients. So it's a really important step in our process.
Well, these are just the match rates. Again, the potential, I thought we'd show a use case here of the real power of the B2B2C graph. And this is with a list of verified business email and phone, i.e. name and a business domain of a business target list, a target audience of 50,000. So think of it as maybe a segment of certain characteristics of companies, and maybe it's IT decision makers or marketing decision makers. So you want to reach these 50,000 people, and it's a test campaign that shows the power of what this unlocks. So you'll notice that right in the middle there, the match rate went from 35%. This was on Google Ads. And Google, there's all kinds of different environments where Google Ads appear, right? Based on the different media properties and social platforms that they operate and so forth. But we were able to take that match rate up to 100% in this case, meaning the potential to put ads in front of all 50,000 people was there. But what's really interesting is you see the increase in impressions. For this test campaign, which was fairly nominal, $150 a day, after you did the enrichment, you were able to drive 5 times the number of impressions. And often what we'll see is that the B2B marketer, they have their media budget and they can't even activate it because they can't generate sufficient impressions within these environments to even spend the budget they have. And so while the match rate went up by 3x, the impression volume that was able to be generated went up by 5x. And what's the most important thing, by every marketer's measure is what was the engagement. And because these ads are appearing within environments where the person is active, they're actually clicking on the ads at 10 times the increase. So the first step is increasing the match rate. That drives more impressions. But what's most interesting is where those impressions are appearing actually drove 10 times the number of click-throughs, which means the people you marketed to engaged with your brand, they went to your website. Of course, you'll see a total cost there because you're actually able to increase your spend. I mean, you're able to actually tap into your media budget most effectively. And this is the crux of a lot of things Matt, your organization and Versium has been working on, and you guys focusing really on that end customer and helping them see the value in centralizing their data, cleansing their data, ultimately enriching it for optimal reach and digital marketing spend and the rest in ROI. And I love showing this because it's just such a game changer when you say you can increase engagement by 10x, and these are all real numbers here. So anything to further comment on this one before we're kind of coming a little bit towards the end here?
Yeah, I think, when you're thinking about everything that goes into a marketing campaign, this is one really important piece. I think Versium touches on the other pieces as well. If you think of it in terms of data decisioning and delivery, the kind of 3 Ds of personalization at scale, you have your first party data foundation. If you're able to enhance that with additional demographic, firmographic information, then you can, personalize the ads, much better. And then obviously on the delivery, which is what we're looking at here, if you can get higher match rates and get those personalized segmented ads in front of the right people, in front of more of the right people, then your campaign performance is just going to go through the roof without a problem. I mean, you're checking all the boxes.
Yep. Well, we kind of covered a lot. I'm just going to let the presentation sit here in a minute. A lot of what we talked about utilizes a number of different tools that Versium operates. We kind of think of it as a data processing workbench with a number of data tools on that workbench that can be used at different points in the journey and being data driven. And for us, being data driven as a marketer is really 3 steps. It's go in and fix the first party data. You've spent a lot of money gathering, marketing, obtaining customer information, whether it's 200,000 records or a major carrier with 100 million records. The first step in really being data driven is fixing that first party data. And lots of tools that can be used to do that. And really that is the absolute first step in your strategy for data enrichment. Don't waste your time getting all this great firmographic and demographic data if you haven't fixed your data first, because there's no point in enriching to bad data, because that, that's a waste. So you'll be more efficient. It'll be, less expensive, and you're only, addressing the good quality data. Even if you don't do data enrichment, you should always be thinking about how do you make your first party data better, certainly before you put it into a CDP. I know Matt and Leverage Lab do a lot to stand up and help their clients turn on these powerful systems when it comes to CDPs and the rest. So data cleanse, next is data enrich in the data-driven journey. And how do you add more data to your first party data? And that may be more contact points, additional emails, address, phone numbers, mobile IDs. Additional contact points allow you to reach both your customers and your prospects more effectively across every channel. And then the last thing is the activation of those channels. And when you start doing the online audience appending and you start doing the segmenting before activation, now when you do activate, whether it's direct mail or whether it's digital, that activation will be most effective. And all of this comes from this data enrichment process on your data-driven journey. And there are a lot of tools that we currently have and that we're launching that can help our customers achieve this thing. And so with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you to kind of put a bow on everything. I mean, at the end of the day, like I say, we focus on the data and the tech side of things, but you guys are the ones that really work with the customers, and that's who ultimately receives this value.
Yeah, I'll be quick about this, but I just wanted to put out some real world use cases. They kind of fall into two buckets. We use Versium for prospecting. So going in and creating new lead lists, especially if you're B2B on your ideal customer profile. We use it to create account-based marketing lists, targeting all of the companies that are important to you and the roles and functions at those companies that are important for you. We're really seeing some interesting things with the IP to domain. So we identify, obviously, you can identify if you're doing it in the right way with the CDP IP address for users. And you can use that information to make your anonymous visitors a little less anonymous by identifying the companies that they're coming from. And there might be companies visiting your site that you had not thought about that you could then use in your ABM campaigns. And then we're using it, obviously, like we talked about, with any type of list that we generate to increase match rates in the paid media platforms. And then with our existing first-party data for our clients, we're using it to identify business persona for consumer emails, to personalize the paid media efforts based on enhanced data, and also personalize on the owned and operated channels, like personalizing the website, personalizing on email, and then again, increasing match rates for that first party CRM data. And I'll just say that I'm happy at any point in time if you want to reach out to me to talk to you more about the Versium use cases that we do for our clients, or if you want to talk about first party data infrastructure and how to achieve personalization at scale, you can reach out to us on the leveragelab.com website.
Great. Well, hey, it's been great chatting with you, Matt, and we really like working with you guys and your team. And so, Michelle, I'm going to turn it back to you. It looks like we got a good 15 minutes here. Maybe we'll end a little early, but we'll see what questions maybe arose throughout the presentation and fire away. We'll Matt, you and I can just take them in real time. Whoever seems like who's best suited here. So
great. Sounds good. Thank you guys so much. So one question I see here is, which contact data points are required for enrichment?
Great question. So, if you're using a good identity platform, virtually any of them can be used, but they have different levels of granularity or match rate. So, for example, first name, last name, and address is a unique identifier of a person. If all you have is an email and an address, or a last name and an address, you can do a household level match, but you don't know whether you're actually talking to the specific person. So we can take just an email. That's a very unique identifier, except sometimes there are shared emails in a household. Phone number these days is very unique because cell phones are unique, typically with one person. And then there's different combinations of these things, right? If you can have first name, last name, address, and email, well, the chances of maybe getting a phone number or getting additional emails just increases. So the more type of data you have is always better. But if you've got really powerful identity matching and deterministic logic underneath, then even if it's a first and a last name, but it's really unique, then you'll be able to get data back, right? So there's a lot of logic that goes into the match scoring, if you will. We look at things like name frequency. We look at two different emails. Do they have the same string in front of the @ symbol? There's all sorts of correlations that can be done. So you can start with just one very small piece of information and get quite a lot back. And then depending on, it varies on each record. So that's a great question. Michelle?
Thank you, Chris. Next question I see here, are there any restrictions on which advertising platforms you can send online audience data to?
That's a great question. I'll take a little bit of that one, Matt, and then see if you want to round out. I mean, typically Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're fairly open in terms, you have to have an ad account there to be able to, we can drop the audiences right into our customer's account. If you're purchasing in different DSPs environment, there can be some approvals that need to be done, and they vary. Some are more strict than others. Generally speaking, when you're uploading first-party data, it's pretty easy to turn those on. So there's not too much of a block. Is there anything, your thoughts on that one, Matt?
Yeah, I would just like to point out that Versium makes it really easy when you've created your list in the platform and you export they call it online audience append. It literally gives you a zip file that has several files formatted, one for each of the platforms. So in the zip file, you'll get Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, ad roll, LiveRamp if you're uploading to LiveRamp, and then a generic file that you can use in a platform that's maybe not one of the typical. So any place that you can upload hashed identifiers to, you can use the Versium output. And then there's also a way to connect a few of those directly within the UI, so you don't have to download the zip file. But they make it really easy. You just select the file and upload it. It's already formatted. The fields will map automatically in those platforms, and you just press go.
Yep. I think you hit a key point there. One of the value points is that we like to think that our customers can own the audience. And so if you've got a list of the people, you can upload it to Facebook, you can upload it to Google, you can upload it to LinkedIn, and you're reinforcing the message to those same people versus going into each platform and who knows who you're targeting. So, yeah.
Great answer, guys. Thank you. This one is slightly related, so I'm going to jump to this. For LinkedIn prospecting, what is your best recommendation? What is your best recommended data required for upload? Is having the LinkedIn handle helpful as part of the custom audience?
Matt, you want to take that one? I mean, from our perspective, we really focus on the identity data, and I know they primarily look at email, but anything you would add relative, we certainly do some things with LinkedIn profile and mapping identity. What are your thoughts there for your experience with LinkedIn?
Well, usually the use cases, you're taking existing data that you have, like an email list or an address list, and you're trying to upload it into LinkedIn. So typically it would be email or a combination of like email, phone, or first name, last name, address, like you said, any of those identifiers. Obviously, if you have email, that's usually the best, but you can work with the other identifiers as well.
We also see different levels of engagement, because when you think about it, how much time do you spend in LinkedIn versus maybe Facebook? And so while there might have an identity mapping, is there the opportunity to put an ad there, or different environments have different, stay time, if you will, where you're, how often are you involved in that environment, and, are you in and out? And some of these things affect the engagement. So while you have a certain match rate, the question is how many impressions could be generated, and ultimately, do they engage with those impressions? And it does vary by platform.
Great, thank you. This question, I think I understand. So they're asking, what would be the single most important data point that was enriched? And so I think, like, is there a contact point or data point that's the most important to have when you are enriching your data? That's how I understand that. If this question is different, go ahead and correct me. Thank you.
Do you mean to match on? Or the information you get back, like the enriched data?
My sense is it's what's the most important thing to key on to do the matching. And that's an interesting question, because if it's all things are equal and we're saying, okay, all of the data is valid and accurate, that's the first most important thing is the data valid and accurate? If somebody's moved from the address and you've got an old address, that may be invalid relative to what's returned. If the email is no longer valid, it's probably less of a concern because the email still would be associated to that person. So it really, the most important thing is again, is it clean and valid? Then, it depends on the data you're bringing back. Different data enrichment has different match rates, and different data is associated more effectively to different inputs. In other words, I'll give you an example. So we see that if you're doing demographic appending or enrichment, meaning consumer demographics, right? Income level, age, things of this nature that are demographic in nature, one of the best inputs is first name, last name, and address. A lot of demographic data at the underlying source is obtained, at an address or household level. Income is like a household level, for example. So now so that's going to mean that your important input is, in this case, first name, last name, and address for demographics. But if you're going with firmographics, well, that consumer address really doesn't have a bearing. You really need now an email, a business email, for example. So if all you have is a consumer email, now we say generically, is email better? Well, in the case of firmographics, that type of enrichment, you really need a business email, because then you go from business domain and now you can pull back details on the business. So if you've only got a consumer email, well, there are solutions that we offer a consumer to business. So we'll take that consumer email, maybe they filled out an @Gmail in a lead form, we'll find their business email. Oh, and now you can do Firmographic append. So it's really not a simple answer, other than, depending on what data you're wanting back, there may be a more optimal input for that data, and it varies. And we can certainly help with all that to increase match rates and to provide some guidance.
Great, thank you, Chris. This was from an anonymous attendee. So if we didn't answer your question, please reach out or clarify. But we're happy to dig in further if need be. Next question here. We have about 5 minutes left, so we'll just tackle a few more. How do I start, and who does this work best for? Is there like a company size or a certain demographic or industry that you feel this works best for, or kind of what are those just steps to getting started?
Matt, why don't you go first? I feel like I've been capitalizing on the voice here a bit, so I'll add some additional color if you want to maybe take that first from your perspective.
Sure. I think there's a lot of value for both small, medium, and large companies. I mean, anybody can benefit from higher match rates on their campaigns. I think, smaller companies struggle with that a bit because their lists are smaller, so it's harder for them to get enough matches in the platforms to do campaigns. And I think this makes the online audience append with the higher match rates makes smaller lists more accessible. But then anyone that's working with like a media budget is tasked with getting better ROI on their campaigns. So anything that you can do, anybody that's doing paid media, I think this is super helpful for. Some other use cases are if you're doing anything with machine learning or analytics and reporting, or kind of doing lookalikes and recommendations and things like that. The more that you know about the user, the better that those things can be performed. So I don't know if we always go back to the use case. I don't think it's necessarily better for one type of company versus another. It's extremely good for B2B marketers. And then, the consumer side is just as good as well. So it really depends on what your use case is.
Yeah, I think it's really a game changer for the B2B folks. We think it from a technology perspective pretty broadly. A lot of the tools we went through, or we kind of that support some of the things we talked about today, they're automated, they're self-serve. There's not a team of data people crunching behind the scenes. What that means is we can make these available very cost effectively. So it does suit the small marketer that has smaller budgets. Obviously, if you're much bigger and you've got a lot of data, well, there's that much more value to be had in some of the things we're talking about when it comes to cleansing and enriching. And there's to key up with something you said, there is in many of these platforms a minimum spend. I think Google requires a minimum of 50,000 of spend. You have to have a minimum audience size. We've had people that simply couldn't activate the audience because it was an audience of only 10, 15,000. And by the time they got the match rate, it fell below the minimum threshold of size of audience to turn on. And once you did the enrichment, we went above that threshold. So when you do get to smaller companies with, say, smaller target audiences or regional in nature, you can run into some of these problems. But the nice thing is, from a tools perspective, it all scales based upon volume of data. So we have some people that, pay a few $100 a month because they get small amounts of data due to enrichment. And we got others that have, millions and millions of records that are getting the same type of enrichment. So from a technology perspective, it's deployable very broadly.
So just want to say final farewell. Thank you for joining us today. We will be following up with recordings of this webinar. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any additional questions, contact info is right there. Don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chris. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.